Hello parents, welcome back. Look, we're nearly done with day 3. I hope you've had some dance parties and I hope you've had some great food to re-energize you, because I know this session is going to be so useful. I'd like to introduce the amazing Kara-Leah Grant, who used to be part of a speaking group that I ran in Wellington and then moved to Auckland, and now she's living in the amazing Thames in the Coromandel. So hi Kara-Leah.
Hi, Karen.
I'm so excited to be able to reconnect with you and know you have some great information that's really going to inspire the teachers and parents on this summit. So, Kara-Leah, I know you're talking about mastering fear and uncertainty, and this is definitely a time, particularly for parents, where we need to be able to harness our own fear and uncertainty and harness our children's as well. So before we launch into that topic, just tell us a little bit more about yourself and who you are and why this is important to you.
Okay. So I have been practicing yoga for a very long time and started teaching in 2006. Probably the most transformational experience that I ever had in my adult life was an experience of awakening/psychosis that saw me end up in a psych ward twice within a month. And that experience really made me go, okay, what's going on with my mind? And it orientated me towards learning how to master the mind, because I recognized that through that experience of psychosis that was brought about by my unwillingness or inability to really stay in my body and feel what was true for me at the time, I had all these defense mechanisms that sent me first into disassociation and then literally into insanity. So since 2006, my practice and teaching of yoga has fundamentally been around how to be embodied, how to be self-reflective and more self-aware, and then ultimately how to understand the mind and master the mind.
Wow. So that's a great story, and wonderful that, you know, we often talk about some of the lowest points in our lives can be some of the most powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so grateful for that experience because of the way it radically reorientated me in life. And it was like I had no choice but to go deeply internal and see what the hell's going on here. How come I'm operating this way? How am I behaving in this way? Why am I thinking in this way? Why am I feeling this way? And it's been an extraordinary journey. So then when things like COVID happen or lockdown, I've got all these tools and techniques and a particular way of looking at reality that means I'm able to not coast through per se, but kind of maximize it in a way, see it as a golden opportunity to flourish.
That's a wonderful perspective, and that's what we want to harness from you today. So,
yeah.
Thanks for being part of this summit with us. So, Kara-Leah, tell us about how a parent's state of being can be reflected in their child.
So it's important to understand that, whilst we appear to be separate individuals, walking around inside these flesh vehicles, the way that human beings connect and relate to each other, if you're in the same room as someone, thanks to things like neurons and just different feedback loops that happen, like co-regulation, whatever state of being a parent is experiencing, right? For example, if a parent is in fight, flight, or freeze, sympathetic nervous system, that state of being will be transmitting in a very subtle way to the child. And because the parent is kind of like the bigger being in the room and also like the reference point for the child, what the child is then perceiving and feeling is there's a reason to be afraid right now. I need to be afraid. I am afraid right now. And so the parent's state of being will ultimately determine the child's state of being.
There's that wonderful phrase, quote that I love, that says, don't worry that your child never listens to you. Worry that they're always watching you.
Yeah, and that's it. And it's the things that are happening really in the subtle world, in the subtle realm, that it's from a consciousness perspective in yoga, it makes so much sense. And neuroscientists, etc., are now starting to clue into these things and have their own scientific language around it. But we just feel this as kids. And I remember distinctly when I was a child, when my mum had a lot of fear, she operated from fear a lot because of her upbringing. And I could sense that and feel that. And as a child, I didn't like it at all. And it made me distance myself from my mother to a degree. And now I was conscious of none of this as a child. It's only in later self-reflection that becomes obvious, you see. And it's important to realize that often adults don't even realize that they're in the sympathetic nervous system. They have no idea that they're in fight, flight, or freeze. They don't even know they're afraid, often because it's become the default state that they're operating in.
So you mentioned mirror neurons, which of course are really important for parents to understand. And if you're not sure about these parents, mirror neurons are neurons in the brain that mirror what you see. So when you're feeding your child, you would have opened your mouth and they open their mouth. And so that children are designed to mirror what they see in their environment and then to pick up those feelings. And so have you ever yawned and everyone else starts yawning around you, or vice versa? And so this is those mirror neurons that we have that Kara-Leah is talking about. So how do we shift? Oh, well, tell us about this fight, flight, and freeze, and how does that work?
Mm-hmm. So our nervous system is either sympathetic nervous system, which is fight, flight, or freeze, or this parasympathetic nervous system, which you could call rest and digest. And when there's a reason to be afraid, when you get triggered, the system will go into fight, flight, or freeze, which in the old days, it's like, you know, if a tiger was coming at you, you'd go into fight, flight, or freeze because of the way adrenaline starts to pump and cortisol starts to go, and there's all these physiological changes in the body which make it much easier to run really fast away from the tiger. Now, in our modern day lives, there's very few tigers. However, because of the nature of psychological fear, when we're afraid of something happening in the future, for example, that fear then triggers fight, flight, or freeze, even though there's no immediate threat in our actual environment. And that puts us into the sympathetic nervous system. And when we go into the sympathetic nervous system, the prefrontal cortex kind of goes offline a little bit. We become ruled by our emotional brain, and we are far less likely to be able to assess a situation and respond in a logical, rational way, because that part of the brain just isn't even accessible to us anymore.
I love the way you talked about the other side being the rest and digest as well, because I think that's quite important to understand, that when we're in fight or flight and when we're in panic, and by the way, the brain doesn't know what's true and what's not true. It just believes everything we think, right? And so when we're in that fight, flight, freeze, stress response, then digestion isn't happening properly. We're not getting the rest that we need, so we become exhausted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. And like I said, if that's your default state of being, that's what a child is swimming in all the time. So then, because they're feeling this, even though there is no reason for them to be feeling these things, they start to, the fear then often leads to anxiety, right? So I work with a few clients that experience anxiety, and what's often underneath that is fear, right? And there's not necessarily a specific reason for it. And especially if you're a child responding to the parents around you. And that's why the parent state of being becomes so crucial.
Absolutely. So how do we shift from this fight, flight, freeze, this stress response, to being more relaxed?
First thing I'd say is to start to be able to notice where you are. Right, to really tune in and say, whoa, where am I? Am I in fight, flight, or freeze? Or am I in rest and digest? And that can take some practice to be able to tune into your own state of being and see where you are. And it will depend on how much embodiment work you've done. So if you already have a solid yoga practice, or you do martial arts, or you do Tai Chi, or maybe you dance, you're more likely to be embodied enough and be able to feel your body from the inside out. So noticing where you are. So the first stage I'd say is for everyone is have some kind of embodiment practice, not just a physical activity, but a physical activity that is bringing you into greater awareness of your felt experience of the body, right? So that's critical. And then what that means is,
to that, you're sort of clarifying some things for me, because I've been doing yoga for a very long time too. But I've just sort of realized that it's more than the physical. I know maybe I'm a slow learner, but I'm realizing that I need to move from the head to the heart space and be more holistic and more embodiment of myself while I'm doing that.
That's it. Like, it depends a lot on the teacher you have, so if you're just realizing this now, like a really good yoga teacher will point you into the felt sense of the body from the inside out, where it's not so much about teaching the physical form of the postures, but about using the physical form of the postures in order to build that ability to feel your own body, to know where your body is in space, and to recognize what's happening in the body.
Yeah. I don't have a physical teacher. I do an online thing, but you're right. I think I just haven't been listening to the teacher. So the teacher has probably been saying this, when have you ever driving down the road and you see a tree and you go, has that tree always been there? And of course it's always been there. So suddenly I'm like, oh, there's more to this than just being able to do a back bend or whatever, that feeling. So carry on. I interrupted you.
Yeah. So once you have some kind of embodiment practice, that will help you to recognize where you are, right? And then once you can recognize, oh, I'm stressed, I'm contracted, I'm tight, I'm in fight, flight, or freeze, then you need something to shift state, right? And what will help you to shift state could be a yoga class. It could be putting on your favorite dance music and just dancing your ass off for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. It could be meditation practice. It might be something like swimming. It's whatever it works for you to simply shift you into a place of calmness. And to me, it always feels like I just drop down. It's just like dropping down into presence or awareness. And I'm able to do that now simply by noticing and choosing. So it happens like that. However, for a lot of people, they're still getting into the embodiment, so they'll need to do an embodiment practice to shift from the fight, flight, or freeze into rest and digest. If you do have a higher level of embodiment, a higher level of self-awareness already, you may be able to do it simply by taking 3 really slow, conscious belly breaths, you see. So it's determining for you, how aware am I? How embodied am I? And what practice will help me to shift in the shortest amount of time possible? And once you know that, make that your go-to thing to do every time you notice that you're starting to go into fight, flight, or freeze.
Is this the same as being an adrenaline junkie? Because I think I'm parents who love the thrill of it all, and I'm an adrenaline junkie. I love the thrill. I'm building the plane while I'm flying it. That's my bit of my philosophy of life. So there's a bit of adrenaline pumping in that. Is that the same as being in the fight, flight, freeze?
Possibly, but not necessarily. Yeah, so it will depend on specific circumstances. However, what you're pointing to, that adrenaline addiction, is true. Like there's this excitement and energy that starts to get going, but then that can lead to a lot of fatigue and exhaustion because you're in that stress response all the time, which is not so great for the body. So it is worth checking in and saying, wait a second, am I addicted to the adrenaline? What happens if I do the same activities? What happens if I build the plane, but just be aware of my breath at the same time?
Yes.
Because the moment you become aware of your breath while you're doing the thing, it's going to naturally slow you down and bring you into rest and digest.
Yeah, I think I've definitely come to that position. I know that my osteopath always says to me, she says, oh, you're really calm for you. She compares me to herself, she's like, actually, I'm not always probably compared to others, but we can't compare ourselves to others.
No.
Kara-Leah, tell us about the role of the mind in dealing with this fear and uncertainty.
So it's worth realizing that whatever you think about a thing will determine how you feel about a thing. And the way that we think is so determined by our beliefs, which are usually unconscious, and our attachments or our aversions, right? And so what an attachment or an aversion is we're really afraid of something, right? If we're really afraid, for example, of our business going under, then, for example, a lockdown, if we're in hospitality and a lockdown happening, that's going to trigger that fear. Now, if we've already failed a couple of businesses and it's no big deal, and we know that we just need to pivot and do something else, and we can handle it, and it's actually kind of an exciting challenge, we won't have the same response to the exact same stimulus. And this is important to understand, because most people have this idea that the reason I feel or think what I'm feeling or thinking is because of what's happening out there. So what's happening out there is the threat. However, that's not true at all. The reason you're having that response is because of what you think, is because of how you perceive it. So you can't control what's happening out there. COVID's going to come or not. Lockdown's going to happen or not. What you do have some control over is the way you look at it and what you think about it, and how attached or afraid you are of things happening. So that's the role of the mind, and that's where it comes into mastering the mind, is starting to really not be identified with your thoughts, not be identified with your mind, and be able to be aware of it. So when a thought comes through, there isn't automatic identification or belief of the thought. It's more like, oh yeah, there's a thought. Do I want to believe that? Is it useful to believe that? Should I action that? No, that's just, I'm going to let that one go. And that's a huge shift that comes again from that ability to become embodied and then more aware, to be able to be aware of the mind rather than identified with it.
It's a wonderful distinction. Brene Brown talks about using this phrase, the story I'm telling myself is. And I think that's a wonderful way to do that as well, because it sort of lets you know that this necessarily isn't true. It's a story that I'm telling myself. And so to separate yourself from your mind is a great thing. So what are some of these strategies to help us to be able to disassociate from the mind, but also to be able to help with this time of uncertainty and challenge?
But I think what you just pointed to is a really good tool, is that when something's unfolding, is to ask yourself the question, what is the story I'm telling myself about this? So if there's a lockdown coming, for example, the story I'm telling myself is I'm going to lose my business and it'll be the worst thing ever. And then you can begin to challenge that. You can recognize that it's just a story. And then what's really useful once you start to see the story that you are telling yourself is to instead ask yourself, what's the story I would love to live into? You see? And instead of the focus being on, I'm afraid of this thing happening, I'm so scared this is going to happen, I'm anxious about this happening, you shift all of that attention and all of that energy, all of that fuel, you shift it onto, where would I like to go? What would I love to have happen? What would excite me about this? And so you channel all of your attention, awareness, and energy toward your desired reality rather than it going towards the thing you don't want, right? And that's one of the greatest powers that we have, is where we place attention, you see. So shifting from what we don't want to what we do want. Simple, so simple, and yet not necessarily easy because of fear. Quite often, like fear, we're so afraid of the thing happening, it can be challenging to shift and start to dream up what we do want, which is where those other practices we talked about shifting out of fight, flight, and freeze, are so important to do first.
And our first speaker this morning at this summit, Lauren Parsons, talked about she says, focus on what you want. And so that strategy, isn't it? If you've parents, if you've already been and seen the recording and the interview with Travis Bell, he talks about vision boarding and again, it's that focusing on what you want. So allowing the fear, acknowledging it, because it's part of what's happening, but then pivoting or changing to looking at what it is you want instead.
Yeah. And it is really important to feel the fear, to acknowledge it, because you can't suppress or deny it. Because if you suppress it or deny it, pretend that you're not afraid, and then try and look at what you want, you're going to be orientating to what you want from fear. So any actions you take will still be fear-based, and any actions that are fear-based will often have, like, the fruits of those actions won't necessarily be enjoyable. So to feel the fear, to acknowledge that you're in fear, then to shift state using whatever practice works so that you can be in your rest and digest and everything's okay, I'm okay. And then from that space of feeling the awesomeness of life, that's where you want to create from. And I think that's critical to remember is, it comes back to that question again, Where am I right now? Oh, I'm in fear. Oh, I'm in awesomeness. And then where do you want to move from? Move from awesomeness.
That's beautiful. So what about what's the importance of, importance of being able to help our children experience this and acknowledging where they're at?
Yeah. So it's really important to understand that when you're communicating with children, what they're really listening and paying attention to and feeling is not your words, it's your state of being. So if you are feeling a whole lot of fear and you're telling them there's nothing to be afraid of, for example, that's a mixed message, and that's going to feel confusing, and it's going to feel even more frightening. And this will be happening on the unconscious level. Your child won't be aware of all this, of course. So when you're communicating with your child, one is to be in a state of rest and relaxation, right? Rest and digest, first and foremost. The second thing is to realize that this is not, you can't logic or rationalize or explain away anything. So if your child, you get a sense that your child's feeling anxious, maybe they even say, I feel really anxious right now. If you say to them, oh, there's nothing to feel anxious about, you're totally fine, you're just denying their emotional reality. And what you're telling them is that they're wrong for feeling a thing. So when a child is expressing or having a certain kind of emotional experience, what you want to do is shift into like deep listening, where you're really just tuning in with your full body to listen to the child's experience and just reflect back what you're hearing them say, so that they know that you're genuinely hearing. So if they're like, I'm feeling really scared about this, or if they say something like, well, what's going to happen if, you might say, oh, how do you feel? And just ask them, how do you feel about that? And then listen and reflect back and allow them, this is the critical bit, like really allow them to feel the truth of their experience while you hold it with love and acceptance, right? Because when you fully hold it and acknowledge what they're feeling, it allows it to simply move through. It makes it feel like it's okay to feel that. It's no big deal that you're feeling that. It's just a natural part of being a human being that you're feeling that. And that means that they get a sense of being able to relax into the feeling. And when they can relax into the feeling, it'll just move through so much faster. And of course, your ability to do that will depend on your own ability to be with uncomfortable emotions. So if you struggle to feel what you're feeling, it will be really challenging for you to allow to feel what your child's feeling. And in fact, it may be that what your child is feeling triggers you. So it's really important to be aware of that. So that's why the work as a parent, I speak from experience here, I have a 10-year-old boy, it really starts with us. It's like the more work we do on ourselves, the more that we're able to be comfortable with our own felt expression of life, the more we can hold space and just allow our children to feel what they're feeling.
Yeah, I'm just reflecting as well, when my daughter was little and she didn't have the words necessarily to be able to explain, I got her a set of those little worry dolls, and she would, in her mind or in her voice, when I even wasn't there, she would put all her worries into the dolls, and magically the worries would disappear. But I think what it was more about, was that she was able to say, hey, this is what I'm worried about, and be aware of it. And so therefore when she acknowledged it, it lessens.
Yeah, that's at the moment that someone feels heard and it feels like their concern is fully acknowledged, there's such a sense of relief. And once you've done that fully, you've acknowledged and you've held the space for them to feel what they're feeling, then you can ask them, what would you like to do about this? Or how would you like to address this? Or what would make you feel better? And this is important too, not telling the child what to do or imposing your thoughts or your ideas upon the child, but simply asking them and trusting that they can resource themselves. And they might say, oh, I don't know, what do you reckon, Mum? Or what do you reckon, Dad? In which case they're asking for your input, and by all means giving it then. But even younger children have the ability to ask for what they need when they're invited to do so and given space for that.
I like that. It occurs to me that journaling might be a useful strategy too, because I personally know when I write stuff down, it sort of releases. as well. So I don't even have to tell anybody else, but sometimes I publish them as blogs. I apologize for my readers. But actually, when I do, what the most amazing, some of the most vulnerable things I've ever written, the most amazing feedback I get is, me too, wow, thanks for that, you've helped me. And so I think sometimes when we share that message, people realize they're not alone. But I do know that when I share that, when I write it, even if it's just writing it for me, it sort of like takes it out of me.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if you've got older children, teenagers, that's definitely something to suggest to them, that they just journal about whatever. I mean, teenagers often naturally do that already, but just to suggest that they journal about what's going on for them, because there is definitely it's almost like a magical process that once something is written down, it loses its power over us.
And I'm wondering for young children, maybe being able to draw a picture of, how that feels, and they might not have the words to describe, but it will definitely help them sort of maybe express themselves in a different way. So, yeah. And
dancing it out with kids is really effective too, particularly if the parent will dance with them. It's like, okay, how are you feeling? What's good? Let's dance it out. Let's just like move it through our bodies. And that's such a good embodiment practice to get in the habit of doing with your children. Like I've been dancing with my son ever since he was old enough to dance with me. And I see how embodied he is now and how useful that is for him to have that experience already of being able to channel things through dance.
Years ago, I went to a workshop and they talked about emotion, and the word emotion is E for energy, in motion. And so when you're talking about the dance and the movement, that's what it's about, isn't it? It's moving the energy.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why if you're in fight, flight or freeze, for example, which isn't an emotion per se, but that movement of the body can be such a good way to process all of the fear response. And so if there's nervousness, if there's excitement or whatever, if there's anger coming through, then just moving and expressing it it's extraordinary. It dissipates it, it dissolves it, doesn't suppress it, doesn't deny it, doesn't get stuck in the body. It just allows the emotion to have an expression. And so much of our society is often the way that we're brought up and the way we're conditioned is we're not very emotionally literate, and we reject our emotional experiences, particularly the ones we define as negative or uncomfortable. But once you get real comfortable with feeling anything and everything, and you're able to simply be aware of your emotion, it's extraordinary in a way. Every emotion, anger is an amazing thing to feel when you're not identifying with it, when you're just holding it. It's like, oh wow, there's anger. Oh wow, there's jealousy. Oh wow, there's that. And it means that no matter what happens, you've got the capacity to be with your own emotional experience, and then by extension, be with your child's emotional experience.
I want to come back to that for a minute. I often talk to teenagers around study time, is that, if you're stuck and it's getting difficult and you're getting frustrated, the worst thing you can do is sit still, walk, run, move, dance. And so all the things you've been talking about, but that makes sense, doesn't it? Because if you just sit there, the emotion or it just sits in that body. So,
there's a stuckness. A contraction, a tightness. It's like, no, I need to expand, need to like come into that.
I love that. So how do parents are busy, there's so much going on, they're often in hurry mode, there's so many things to do, get the kids out the door, get them to sport. How do you hold that space for a child?
One is to be attuned to opportunities. And that means this whole thing with busy and rushing, when it really comes down to it, no matter how many things you have to do in a day, you can only be with what's happening right now. And rushing or busyness is actually a state of mind. So if you can recognize that and deliberately slow down and be where you are, recognizing that slowing down usually means that more things will happen. Whereas rushing often means that mistakes happen or stuff goes down or less things happen. So first thing is to challenge that, notice that rushing, busy state of mind and consciously shift into a slowness, particularly in the mornings. Like no matter how many times you tell your child to hurry up, they're never going to, ever. No child has ever hurried up upon being told by an adult to do so. They just do not operate that way. So instead, just slow down and be with them and see what support they might need, for example. And when you do that, you'll start to attune to opportunities to connect with your child. You'll start to notice where your child actually is. You'll start to notice what it is they might need in that moment, because you won't be in your mind spinning about all the things that you have to do before. You'll be like, with your child. And again, that comes back to becoming embodied and building up your ability to be aware of what's unfolding for yourself and the people around you.
So to hold that space for the child is about that awareness of this is an opportunity for me to slow down.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're moving through the morning routine and the child suddenly starts to speak about something that happened at school yesterday, if you're attuned and you go, oh, this is important, you will catch it and then respond and be able to be responsive to what's happening. Now, if you're in the busy mode and your child starts to share something and you miss the cue, then whatever it is that could have unfolded from that connection is just lost, and your child probably doesn't feel heard in that moment and maybe slightly less likely to tell you things. And over a period of time, you end up with teenagers that just don't talk to you.
That makes so much sense, that children have this uncanny way of wanting to open up those conversations in the time that you feel like you have the least time.
Yeah.
Before they go to bed, and you're like, no, lights are out, and it's like, or just as they're getting out the car, or by the way, I need to tell you, or so it can be really frustrating. But I love this idea of just being able to slow down, take that breath, and just be with them.
Yeah. It's challenging your own ideas about what's important. And, I find out with my son is often when I'm putting him to bed, that's when he finally softens and opens up and wants to spend time with me. I've been available for the last 5 hours. It's now 9:30 at night. You're already late to bed. Now you want to hang out. But do I impose the bedtime, or do I just soften and give him, and be with him then because he's ready? And that's a part of the dance. It's like he's not going to fit into my schedule. I have to be responsive to his needs. I have to be responsive to where he is. And then what he feels like, he feels valued. He feels seen. He feels heard. But if I'm always shutting him down because it's not appropriate time for me and it's not convenient for me, the messaging is that I'm more important than he is.
Kara-Leah, I think this is so valuable for the parents listening. I hope you're taking notes, parents, and finding this as valuable as I am. I'm reflecting about, can do some things different. I know we hadn't asked you this question, but considering that parents are going to say, I'm starting to feel guilty that they haven't been doing this, that they've missed those opportunities. Any advice for them around feeling guilty about not having done this?
Yeah, the first is to recognize that that's another mind trip as such, and that judging ourselves for anything uses up enormous energy. And there's a whole big body of work around being able to just radically self-accept whatever is happening, which actually means that you're able to be more responsive. Because if you go into guilt about what has already happened, that you have no control over, that you cannot change, you don't have the capacity to simply be present and aware and with your child now and be in a different way. You're still in a self-absorbed loop of me, now I'm guilty. And so recognize if guilt arises, hi guilt, just feel it, but don't believe in it, right? Don't believe that there's any reason for you to feel guilty, because there's not. You were doing the best you could based on the conditioning that you had at the time and what you knew at the time. So if you notice it happening, just be with it and let it just move through you. Don't let it hook you. Don't let yourself become identified with it. There is nothing to worry about, right? And then that allows you to simply get really clear on your desired reality. How would you like to be in relationship with your child? How would you like to hold space with your child? What would you like to see unfold? Put all of your energy, attention into that, so that what you're moving towards is the desire rather than focusing on what didn't happen in the most perfect way in the past.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. As we begin to finish up, Kara-Leah, if there is one thing you really want parents to be left with to remember about this parenting journey from a parent to a parent, what might that be?
The thing that has the most impact on your child is your ability to be present with your own emotional reality and therefore with their emotional reality. So doing your work, getting clear in yourself, dealing with your traumas and patterns and whatever will always, always, always benefit your child more than anything else.
And that's scary. And powerful.
It's so powerful. What else are you going to do with this life? You might as well clean up that stuff and then enjoy the fruits of it.
Absolutely. So that is just beautiful. And yes, I know that when I've done that inner work and when I continue to do the inner work, I see the fruits of that labor through my children, through my work, through everything that I do. So how powerful that is. Kara-Leah, thank you so much for taking the time to be able to share with us today, to be able to give us some, pearls of wisdom and some wonderful mind shifts about how we really look at this. Because I think that's part of the key, isn't it? That we get stuck in that mind and we get stuck in the labels and stuck in the words. And I love that. Just let it go and let it go, and then just embody the feeling and just be.
Yeah, just be with what's unfolding and trust that you can respond from the deepest part of your being.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you, parents. I think after that, it's a wonderful opportunity to another dance party, another get up and move, go hydrate yourself so you're ready for the next video, and I'll see you on the next one.